Kula Vinaka and welcome to For the Record. The Bainimarama government has hit the ground running with various reforms in various ministries ever since the new government was appointed. Now, throughout the following weeks, we will try to bring you interviews and comments from various ministers about what their plans are for their ministries. One of the key points that's been made over and over again is civil service reform. In fact, this was part of the Prime Minister's victory speech after the Fiji First Party won the election. So that would give an indication of how important civil service reform is to this government. And in studio with us to talk about these is the newly appointed Minister for Public Service, Mr. Aya Syed Kayum. Minister, thank you very much for joining us tonight. First of all, as I mentioned, reform is a key word for this government, and more so civil service reform based on the comments that have been coming from the Prime Minister and yourself. What scale of reform are we talking about?
Well, we're looking at a very comprehensive reform, Edwin. As you know, that the civil service has not really been reformed or assessed in terms of its applicability to the 21st century. And as you know, in particular after 1987, a number of changes took place post-1987 that perhaps did not augur well for creating a modern civil service. And so what we want to do is take a holistic approach to a review of the civil service, the reforms as we talk about. And there's a number of aspects to that reform. And they can range, obviously from the size of respective ministries or departments, the manner in which they conduct their business, the career paths that need to be developed for the specific civil servants, whether there's adequate remuneration for civil servants, in particular, say, for specialized areas, whether there's enough or adequate training for civil servants, the manner in which civil servants are appointed or selected, whether, for example, some ministries need more civil servants. Some ministries obviously could do with less civil servants, but more technology. All those aspects need to be, in fact, looked at.
You mentioned 1987. Do you feel that this is where the rot in the civil service took place? Because we know it's been said over the years that a lot of the brain drain happened after the events of 1987 and since has been happening. Do you feel that that's where the foundation was set? Because we lost a lot of experienced civil servants, and then people who necessarily did not have the experience and the know-how to do the job had to fill in these positions.
Well, in fact, if you talk to some people, they'll say that perhaps the system was wrong before even 87. But there's no doubt, of course, there was a lot of brain drain from the civil service post-1987, the events of 14 May 1987, and indeed 25th of September 1987. But the point is that we need to be able to address those issues. Yes, there has been brain drain. Yes, maybe perhaps there was nepotism even before 1987. But the reality is that there has been no structured approach to reforming the civil service, and we want to take a structured approach to reforming the civil service. We already have spoken to a couple of multilateral agencies on a bilateral basis, informally, and we hope to have a form of a structured approach finalized at least within the next 1 month or so, so we can carry out the review, the assessment, fairly expeditiously, very quickly, for its implementation.
I know what you say about there not being a structured approach, but since 87 till today, there's 20 odd years of, can I say, rot, as I said earlier, in the civil service. This would compound the work that you are now trying to start, because there's been nothing done since 87.
Yeah, I think, we have to also appreciate the fact that there are also some very good civil servants. We're not saying all civil servants are bad. We are not saying that all processes are bad. But in order for it to be robust, to be responsive to the public needs, to the change in technology, to the change in the processes in which you run a government, we need to carry out a holistic review of the civil service. So yes, there are certain areas that need to be obviously fixed up quite fundamentally. There are certain areas that we may need to tweak, but most definitely there needs to be specific career paths. Let me give you an example. Because of the way the civil service is structured, it's sort of fairly hierarchical, and there has been no, I suppose, attention given or kudos given to specialization. So I may be somebody, say for example in industry and trade, and I may be in the past 80 years or so become an expert on WTO rules. I know the ins and outs of the WTO rules or various trade agreements. But because I'm at a particular position, there's now no way for me to go higher. So I may, for example, see, oh, there's an opening in another ministry. And that may be in the Department of Mangroves or some other department where the skill sets, the knowledge base that I have acquired is probably not even relevant directly to it. But I will go there because I want to get a higher pay rise, So all those years of training that I received, it's all lost. Not just for me personally, but for the government as a whole, for the taxpayer as a whole, because we may have sent this particular person away for training, etc., secondments, but suddenly all that skill set is lost, and now he or she is in a particular department where they no longer require the skill sets. So we again have to get into the idea, the process of training somebody else. So that brain capacity, that knowledge capacity is lost again. So the civil service cannot afford to do that. If you look at, for example, countries like Singapore, they start identifying people or creating interest, even at a high school, even primary school level, for students say, oh, well, okay, I want to, work in the Ministry of Transport because I like logistics, or I like, maritime studies. So how do we create and inculcate that idea or that attraction about the civil service also? That's another aspect to it. So we want the best people to join the civil service. In fact, a country like Singapore is a very good example of that, where the private sector says, hey, we have to be like the civil service. Whereas in Fiji, we have a tendency of saying we want our civil service to be like the private sector. So we need to change that, that ball game. We need to change that nexus about it. And bring about that level of not just confidence individually for the civil servants, but the public's confidence in the civil service overall.
Are the current policies too rigid, and is it a disadvantage?
Rigid in what sense?
Let's take the career path, for example. Are there too many policies or too many procedures and too much red tape?
Well, I think, there are many aspects of it. As far as the career paths are concerned, I think there has been no specific development in that area to address the example that I gave, that how do we retain people and make them feel a sense of specialist in that area, and that they maintain adequate levels of remuneration so that they remain there. We had, for example, just to give an example, in the elections office, we had experts from different electoral commissions coming in who were like experts in ballot boxes. And they lived it, they breathed it, they had a passion for it. Now, how do you maintain that level of passion and degree of belonging and identification to that particular process of the elections department? In the same way, we want somebody, for example, who may be working in the Ministry of Cooperatives, to have that passion for cooperatives. How do we get out to the public and get them to see the significance or the importance of cooperatives, and how can we make that relevant to the development of Fiji? Now, that civil servant must feel passionately about that. They must feel a sense of identification. But if we don't have that culture created, then obviously it'll be just another job. They'll come to work 8:30 or 8 o'clock to 4:30 and go away and look for another pay rise somewhere else and go to another department. We want to change that ball game.
All right, Minister, thank you for that. We will take a quick break. We're speaking with the Minister for Public Service, Mr. Aya Syed Qayyum, about civil service reform. We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. We're speaking with the Public Service Minister, Mr. Aya Syed Qayyum, about civil service reform. Minister, before the break, you spoke about how there's a need to change people's mindsets and to build passion, but I would think there would be more to it apart from the human resource side. What about the procedures and processes?
Yeah, I think, there are two aspects to it. One is the actual HR, human resource side of civil service reform, in terms of attracting the best people, creating interest for them, the remuneration, etc., and also the process of selecting people. Now, on the other side of the civil service, obviously, which is more, if you like, business orientated also, is the actual processes. So, for example, if I go and apply for a license, what are the steps that I need to take to be able to get that license? Now, generally what happens is once I may fill out the application for that license, there's an internal process too within the ministry or the relevant department. Now, what loops do they have to jump through? Is it efficient? Is it too bureaucratic? Even internal processes, for example, in the Ministry of Finance, the minister has to sign a number of RIEs or requisitions for budgetary allocation. Now, surely many countries have done away with the manner in which we deal with it. So what are the modern day practices of that? Because they'll create efficiency. It also must create more accountability. Now, there's a general sense by some people that if you have more accountability, therefore it must be, by natural extension, be bureaucratic. No. You can be accountable, you can be efficient, without necessarily being bureaucratic. So these are some of the internal processes that we need to look at. There are also various aspects of government departments or certain ministries that may not necessarily sit very comfortably with a modern day government. There are a lot of things that can be, in fact, done a lot better by the private sector. But let's not, privatize it or give it out or outsource it for the sake of it. So this is why we're talking about a comprehensive, a review. We need to look at all aspects of it. Some countries, for example, have experimented. We're going slightly off track, but I'm talking about outsourcing. Have gone outsourced or privatized for the sake of it. We are saying, no, let's not do that. There may be certain instances where it's actually required. We need to do that. In certain other instances, we can have a partnership with the private sector, or we can have a dual approach to a particular service that needs to be provided to the members of the public. So fundamentally, there are two aspects to this. One is the service aspect of the civil service, because obviously the taxpayer wants their tax money spent wisely, and they require a adequate level of service, not just a mediocre level of service, but a very good level of service, and that's what we want to achieve. How do you best achieve that? By having the best people to do the job. How do you best achieve that? By having the best processes in place. How do you best achieve that? By having people who are actually providing the service wanting to provide the service. And they themselves need to feel very confident about who they are, what they are doing, and they feel a sense of stakeholdership. As I said to a group of civil servants a few days ago, sometimes they may not necessarily realize that because of their inefficiency or lack of care, you actually may be holding up hundreds of jobs. You may be actually affecting some individual's life where they may not actually get water or electricity or access to a good road. So that level of connectivity needs to be drawn. In the same way that a minister must know that when they are inefficient or they are slow or they don't respond on time, you could be affecting an entire community. So these are very critical aspects to understand. There's some very basic issues too, like the ability to write well, to be able to comprehend issues, ability to be able to write basic good letters. That's very, very important, to be able to communicate well.
Are you saying there are some people in a job who aren't necessarily able to perform?
Most definitely. So, just because they may not perform doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to do it. They may not necessarily receive the right training. Some people may not be able to do the job at all, but they've just got there by some chance or some fate or whatever the reason may be. But the point is, there are some people who are very good, they're very keen to learn, they're very loyal to the system, but they have not received the right training. So we need to be able to identify that. Like I said earlier on, there's some ministries that do require more individual civil servants in that ministry or in that department. There's some of the others you see they are extremely bloated. They don't need them. So all of that needs to be assessed in a very comprehensive manner.
All right, we'll talk more about numbers soon, but I'll take you back to an earlier point about how one civil servant could be holding up hundreds of jobs. Do you feel that there is a lack of empathy and compassion in some areas of the civil service, mostly those who deal with everyday Fijians on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, we have received a lot of feedback. Yes, there are some civil servants, like I said, who may not necessarily have that sense of empathy or that level of connectivity. Some do. We can't say that all civil servants are bad. We can't say not all of them, are doing the job or not doing the job. So I think the point is this: yes, there are some who are not doing the job. You find sometimes that in a particular ministry, a particular department may be doing well, but the other side is not doing well. So there may be some systemic issue. There may be issues pertaining to, well, the structure is not actually right. So there's no simple solution or simple answer to that. And I think the proclivity of a particular problem existing all across the board is not necessarily there, because I think different ministries are different, sort of, have their different issues. But I think the main point is this: at the end of the day, no matter which ministry you're working in or department you're working in, everybody must understand they're part of one big team. We must get away from this idea of becoming very territorial about our ministry. In the same way, like, for example, at the moment you see through Fiji Roads Authority, the Minister of Infrastructure, Honorable Tikundu Ndua, has said about all these works that they're going to engage in. So the four-laning of roads now, from the airport to Namaka. Now that actually requires a number of agencies to come together, because you have electricity, you have water, you have the telephone company, telecom. All of them are affected. Now all of them need to work as a team, because if you're going to four-lane it, you may be actually needing to move some power pole posts, you need to move some water pipes and all of that. Now we don't obviously want to do a four-lane and suddenly Water Authority comes along and says, I want to dig up the road now because the pipe's not right. So it needs to have a comprehensive approach to it, but it needs to be a teamwork. So we're trying to inculcate that idea, and I think generally through the reform process, we want everybody to be able to feel a sense of belonging, that we are one team, Team Fiji. It's been used very much in a cliched term, but the reality is that the civil servants need to think like that also.
All right, we'll take another break, Minister. We'll be right back talking to the Minister for Public Service, Mr. Ayase Kayum. Welcome back to For the Record. We're talking about public service reform with the Minister, Mr. Ayase Kayum. Minister, as you said, the whole reform is a comprehensive exercise and operating on many levels. Is this going to be done by people within the Public Service Commission, or do you expect to appoint some independent committee?
No, we hope to get some external resources to do this for us. I think it's always good to have a third party carrying out the review process. Of course, they can consult as many people as possible within the service itself and outside, and members of the public in Fiji. But it'll need to be done externally, because I think it's good to have an arm's length. And also good to get people who have carried this out in other countries also. It's not to say that what has happened in country X can be uniformly applied to Fiji, but there's generally tends to be a certain level of similarity, at least in the principles of it. So we hope to get an external party. There's already, like I said in the beginning, a couple of multilateral agencies have shown some interest, and a couple of individual countries have shown some interest. There's different levels of expertise that we can pick from them, and put the best team together.
But who would spearhead the entire exercise, though?
Well, we yet to finalize that, and obviously it won't be prudent for me to say that now. But once we finalize that and sign on the dotted line, then we can obviously make that announcement. We would like to do it as soon as possible, and I'm sure that everybody wants that done as quickly as possible, both the civil servants and members of the public, the Fijian taxpayers. And the sooner we implement it, the better it is.
A lot of people will be thinking tonight, are there going to be job losses?
Well, like I said, we have to wait for the review, get the review carried out. As I said, there are certain ministries that may need more people. Some could do without some. How people can be moved around with their skill sets, etc. We don't want to preempt all of this. I think the whole focus is, as also the Prime Minister said, we want to work together with the civil servants. The idea is not to, necessarily slash and burn, but the idea is to put in place at the end of the day a modern Fijian civil service that can provide the best levels of service. We have a very good economic growth rates that have been happening in the past number of years. Now with the elections in place, we have wonderful opportunities being created with our development partners, and the outlook for the economy is looking very, very positive. So we want to capitalize on that. you can't have one major component of the economy, which is the civil service, lagging behind. So there needs to keep pace with that. Because if the implementing arm of the reforms, if the implementing arm of government and policy is behind, then obviously we won't be able to take maximum usage out of, or use the maximum capacity of the economic growth rate that awaits us.
This is something that you would like to do within 4 years, I understand. It's a massive exercise. Is it realistic?
Well, we hope to do it within 1 year, to have that study done and it being implemented. A lot of countries have done it in a very, very quick span of time. We obviously don't want to hurry it for the sake of it, but we want to do it very comprehensively and in a very systematic manner.
Come a year from now, or when this reform is complete, some would say it would throw the civil service helter-skelter. People wouldn't know what's going on or how it's being done. What sort of plan do you envisage in bringing about these reforms?
Well, when we talk about a comprehensive review and a comprehensive plan, it also involves a particular level of confidence within the system. There's no way it's going to be helter-skelter. Comprehensive review means also that the implementation is done in a very systematic manner with the least disruption. It's like going to Nandi Airport at the moment. They're carrying out a massive refurbishment, but it's done in a systematic manner. So in the same way, we hope to do it with the civil service. And we'll have professionals with us who are quite willing to work with us.
Do you expect this would be an exercise that would require large sums of money?
No, not necessarily. And I think today we had a very, very successful meeting, and in fact an unprecedented meeting where we had right from the Prime Minister and all the ministers having a face-to-face meeting with all our development partners. And we in fact gave a presentation to them in terms of our goals and vis-a-vis the different ministries, what is their focus, where do they want to be in a few years' time, what are some of the immediate needs, and establishing that one-on-one relationship between the development partners and the ministers. And then over the next couple of weeks, they'll be able to hone in the areas. They talk to the capitals, the various missions, or their head offices, and say what areas they can help us in. And the reason being that is that we are able to then provide a comprehensive way forward. And that goes to prove that if you deal with it in a sort of systematic approach, in a transparent manner, it can be implemented quite successfully.
On that note, we will take another break. We'll be right back with more discussions with the Minister for Public Service. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. Our discussion tonight, civil service reform, one of the priorities of the Mbandi Marama government, and speaking to us about this reform is the Minister responsible, Mr. A.S. Syed Qayyum. Mr. Syed Qayyum, last week on the show we had the Minister for Education, Dr. Mahendra Reddy, talking about the problems that the education system as a whole is going through. And one of the key points he made was that there are a lot of people sitting on jobs that they've been sitting on for so many years, and they've become comfortable in those positions. And they're opposed to the reforms that the education minister is trying to bring about. Do you expect similar opposition when you talk about a holistic review of the civil service?
Well, let me put it the other way. There are some people who are civil servants who are looking forward to the review. So, I think there's some people may be, some people may not be. But the reality is it is going to happen. That is one of a part of the manifesto that the Prime Minister had announced. And anybody who is going to be independently and objectively looking at this issue will say there is a need for review. I think everybody, if you went and asked all the taxpayers in the street and you said, do you think the civil service needs to be improved? Do you think the services need to be improved? They will say yes to you. And so obviously it is our responsibility as government to carry that out. And so it will be done. Yes, of course, some people don't like change, as we've seen throughout our history. But change is inevitable. Change needs to take place. Change needs to take place if we want to remain relevant as a country, as an economy, as a society. Because if we don't change, then we get left behind. And we have changing demographics. We have a very young population. 200,000 voters are below the age of 30 in the last elections. Give another 4 to 8 years, there will be a lot more people. So they obviously have certain requirements, certain needs, certain demands, and we need to be able to fulfill that. And part of fulfilling that need or demand is fundamentally through the civil service.
The minister also made the point that Fiji's education system and our performance in education has dropped over the years and continuously so. Do you feel that this is partly because of the civil service legacy from 1987 onwards? We had so many educationalists who left, and those positions may have been filled by juniors, people who did not necessarily have the knowledge to fill in these positions and to educate the younger generations who've grown up with that same mentality.
I think, partially, there is that's one of the reasons. There's also, if you look at, for example, even within the Ministry of Education, the Minister and I have had discussions where you have, for example, teachers holding bureaucratic positions. Their training is in teaching, but they're actually administrators and bureaucrats. In the same way, if you see in some of the hospitals where you had doctors being administrators of hospitals. Doctors, not all doctors are trained to be administrators. Most doctors are trained to be doctors. So that's their profession, and that's what they should be doing. So again, it goes back to the manner in which the civil service has been run. In the same way, a nurse, maybe a very good nurse, it doesn't necessarily mean that they may be a very good administrator.
So are you talking about splitting the roles of civil servants based on their skill sets?
No, what I'm saying is that the civil service structures need to be responsive and need to be able to get the best people for the best positions. I think that's very critical. And that's where the reform also comes into play too. If you're a teacher and your training is simply in teaching, not simply, but is in teaching, then you should be teaching. Of course, some teachers have gone on to become good bureaucrats or administrators, but they need to have the right training for that. And so I think the whole focus of the civil service review also needs to capture that. We need to have, like I said, the best person for the right job. And if we are able to identify that and also help develop special career paths for them, then you'll find that their level of output is a lot better. You find if you read the Auditor General's report that has been being revealed slowly by the media, there's so many areas where the Auditor General's report has identified that could have actually been avoided if people had the right training, right skill sets. They're not necessarily abuse of office, they're not necessarily corruption, but simply people may not necessarily have had the right training, or they are in the wrong person in the wrong job. So those sorts of, I think, anomalies can be fixed up if we are able to address that fundamental issue.
I'll rephrase the question. Would you recommend that people with specific skill sets be directed towards their field of expertise, leave the teachers to teach, leave the nurses and doctors to administer medicine, and hire people with administration skills to run the show behind the scenes?
In some areas, most definitely. But we can go overseas where some doctors were doctors before and now are very good administrators, because they've probably gone off and done an MBA and specialized in administration. So we cannot sort of blanket say yes, that is the solution. But what it would appear in Fiji's case, that the problem has been that the people who were trained for a specific area are now doing jobs that they were not necessarily trained for.
Was it because it was easier back then to just put somebody with knowledge base from the specific sector?
Perhaps it was also because the way the structure was in place, because I wanted to get a higher salary structure. So, if I were a primary school teacher and I saw, okay, well, maybe if I go and took that administrator's position, I'll get, a $5,000 pay rise. And so I'll go off and do that. But I may not necessarily be the best person for the job. So also it depends on the selection criteria. There's also been, in some of the instances we've seen, where people have been selected, there's been a tendency by the Public Service Commission and various other people who appointed civil servants to appoint people from within the service. So they weren't necessarily looking outside the service. And that in itself, I think you're then limiting the pool of people that you can select from. So, we've seen instances where people have been knocked back and saying, oh, they don't have any public service experience. But no, hang on, a person from the private sector can bring very good skill sets. You don't necessarily have to be from the public service to bring about good skill sets. You don't have to be somebody from the public service to be a good public servant. So I think, there needs to be an expansion in the manner in which we look at positions, the way we appoint people, the priorities we give to in terms of the selection criteria. I think that's also very important.
Would you be able to say whether a senior civil servant in a bureaucratic position after the reform would end up on a frontline job based on their skills? Would that happen?
Well, I really don't know. I mean, I can't tell you that. Like I said, there are different ministries, different departments have different, peculiarities, different strengths, different manner in which you need to address those issues. So, I don't want to preempt what this review process will have as its output. But definitely we know some of those issues that I've raised with you, that some of those principles do exist and they need to be addressed also.
You mentioned earlier the hiring done by the PSC, choosing people from within the civil service. Apart from that, have you found that there is still nepotism and favoritism in the PSC? That was a huge problem, you'd have to admit, some 10 years ago or even further back.
Well, in fact, to be frank with you, that's one of the things we discovered in 2007. There are a lot of people, in fact, in one of the ministries, without naming it, some people were hired on the basis that they had to give a particular cut of their first pay to the permanent secretary. There are some people who actually had to sleep. Some women had to sleep with the permanent secretary. There are a number of anomalies. I mean, I don't want to list all of them. There are a lot of problems. There are some people who were hired because of, who they knew. Minimum qualification requirements weren't met or they were waived. So there's a number of issues. But, we obviously need to learn from that. And some of them you will not believe. You fall off your chair if we told you some of the stories, how some people got appointed. But we want to focus on the future. Yes, there may be some people within the system who have got there because of some peculiar arrangement they may have had with previous people who were within the service. But we now are focused on the future. We need to see overall what type of service we want, how best we can structure or restructure the ministries and the departments. We don't want them to be bloated. There is a sense that the bigger the ministry, the bigger everything is, the better it is. In the same way, a lot of people in civil service think that you write a 10-page brief, it's really good, when really they could write it in a page and a half. So big is not necessarily beautiful. So you need to have the right type of people, the right size in the civil service, the right technology, the right attitude, and the right qualifications to be able to deliver an efficient service.
All right, Minister, time for another break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're nearing the end of the show, but we will continue discussions with the Minister for Public Service, Mr. A.S. Said Kayum. Minister, before the break, I asked about possibility of nepotism and favoritism. You listed out how things have changed, but since 2007 till today, how has it changed? How much improvement have we seen in hiring and firing, nepotism and favoritism?
Well, I think, there's been a lot of positive changes that have taken place in terms of the recruitment, in terms of the assessment. But obviously there's a lot more room for improvement. But again, I go back to the same issue that we've been highlighting, that the fundamental structure needs to be reviewed in itself. There's no point fixing things up here when the fundamentals aren't right. And the review process is to fix up the fundamentals, to get those right structures in place, get the right levels of skill sets in place, the adequate numbers in place. And then we'll be able to then take a comprehensive approach to developing the civil service and being able to attract a lot better people to the civil service.
I take on board what you say, but civil servants who would be watching right now, and those particularly who may not have gotten the job based on merit, they would be thinking, is their job secure?
Well, again, as we've been saying a number of times, we're not here to, slash and burn. We're here to essentially get the fundamentals right, and we'll work through that process with all the civil servants.
At the end of the reform, do you expect that there would be more savings from the civil service?
Look, with any organization, if you improve the efficiency, you'll always have savings. Whether it's directly with the organization itself, in this case it's government, or whether it's overall within the system, so which is the economy. So, if, for example, a person, if you fix up the processes, a person who has to take a long trip to Lautoka to get a particular service and then gets told, well, come back tomorrow or come back 2 days later, if that stops, then obviously we're creating efficiency. We're saving him money, we're saving the economy money, we're getting greater output from the economy. So overall, of course, the whole focus is to get the level of efficiency which will save people money, because there are still many aspects of civil service delivery that needs to be improved. A very basic thing like putting up the Ministry of Social Welfare office on the first floor without a lift. You have disabled people and there's no disabled access. So who was the person who made the decision in that particular ministry to put the Ministry of Social Welfare, where you have disabled people visiting, where you have elderly people visiting, to climb up 2 flights of stairs, 1 flight of stairs? That obviously is not the right decision. So it's a very basic issue like that, to hiring the best people for the job, to ensuring that there is efficiency in the processes. So there's a whole gambit of areas that we need to look at.
You made a very interesting point about hiring the right people for the job. There are a lot of graduates coming out of universities, institutes, and the public service or the civil service is the largest employer in Fiji. At the end of the reform, when you have these new policies and procedures in place, what would you say to these new graduates about their opportunities as a public servant and their future?
Well, we want to attract the youngest and the brightest to the civil service. We want to be able to tell young people that the civil service is a great place to work, and that you have a great career path, and it's exciting to work there, and you'll be contributing to the economy, and you'll be helping not just help improve your life, but the lives of all other Fijians. So yes, as you know, the Bainimarama government took that step of bring down the retirement age to 55, and that was one of the principal reasons, was to we recognize the fact that a lot more younger people who are coming into the system, and they need to be given opportunities also. So with the creation of the efficiencies within the civil service, we hope to attract a lot more younger people to the service also.
I understand that the review will possibly provide the answer to my next question, but would you have an estimate of what the productivity level of the civil service is right now, and where it should be, and where you hope to bring it after the reform?
Well, like you said, let's wait for the review, and there's obviously various methodologies of measuring that, but a lot of the times it's more to do with what is your intended output, and what is the actual output, what is the intended objective of your function, and what are you actually functioning as, and in what form are you functioning. So I think that's why the review is very, very necessary. The assessment is also very, very necessary, and a way forward, because you see, Fiji is not like, for example, a country where you have just one landmass. We also have the maritime services, maritime areas, the islands. We need to ensure that when we talk about bridging the digital divide, we need to ensure that it's not just a question of bridging the digital divide on Viti Levu only. A student in Viti Levu who receives a particular level of service through the information technology, the student in Kandavu must also get that, or in Lau, or Lomai Viti, Yasawa, or Rotuma. And that's a challenge, but that's what government must be focused on, to be able to have the right brain skill sets, the intellectual input, the dedication, the loyalty, to ensure that as a civil servant I'm constantly thinking about these issues, that I'm not just only focusing on what we call the easy fruits. We must also ensure that the people in the outer islands are also looked after, and the civil servants must always be thinking about them too. So service delivery is not just about ensuring that we have the right logistics in place, or the right ships, or maritime services, but also in terms of the service delivery of the civil servants. They must provide that input also, and have that sense that we must be able to provide service to everybody in Fiji.
The things that you're talking about is something that is very individual, very personal, and it has to come from within. Do you feel that the reform will be able to change the mindset of civil servants?
I think it's the outcome of the reform and the structures we put in place that must inculcate that individual sense of service. But like I said, human beings are very complex people, complex beings, I should say. That it's not just one thing that drives you. There are a number of factors, so we need to be able to adequately address that. So it's not just necessarily for some people remuneration. There's also a sense of belonging, the training levels, the level of confidence, the level of loyalty to the policy. All those things combined together, that's what a structure should do. And that's how many countries throughout the world have carried out those types of reforms, simply to be able to achieve that objective, so that a person individually feels that he or she can contribute a lot, but also as a team and know that they're part of the team.
Last question, Minister, as we wrap up the show. What would be an adequate measure of a civil servant's performance after the reform?
Well, it's a bit hard to kind of talk in the abstract about that. I think individual service levels or output also depends on the individual jobs and the individual departments or ministries. It's like saying, I remember some years back, somebody's trying to assess the number of successful prosecutions the DPP had, or the number of successful arrests that, say, for example, the police has. Do you assess it by the number of successful arrests, or do you assess it by the ability to maintain peace? You'd rather have the ability to maintain peace and law and order than to have arrests, because arrest is actually the next step. So I think different ministries will have different ways of measuring their success rate or the output and the objectives. In the same way, for example, you can't expect all government departments or ministries to always make money. There will be certain services provided by government that will make a loss, but it's an essential loss. So, whilst all the technology has been changed and we now have efficiency, to still get a birth certificate extract still costs you $2.25, somewhere thereabouts, less than $3 in any case. And we want to do that because you want everybody to be able to have a birth certificate. In the same way, hospital services. But there may be other instances where a company is applying for a license. You have the right license fees, and they can afford it, they can pay it. And in a way, they are indirectly subsidizing the cost for the ordinary Fijian when they still get the birth certificate at $2.25. So, we have to weigh that also. Government is not just about making money, it's about fundamentally ensuring that service is provided. And the people who are, and it does not discriminate against people who have, low levels of income. But for example, if businesses apply for a hotel license, etc., they need to pay the right amount of fees. We had fee structures in place, or still have in certain areas, where it costs, more to go and do the inspection and come back and issue the license than the actual license fee itself. And the company can actually afford to pay more. And that's what we need to review. So, it's a combination of a whole gambit of areas that we need to fix up. But ultimately, the idea is to ensure that the civil service provides the service that it's supposed to provide.
Minister, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Naka. And that wraps up another segment of For the Record. Remember, for your questions or comments, you can email us fortherecord@fbc.com.fj. That's the show for tonight. We'll join you again next Sunday. Until then, Modemanda.